You promised to protect me," Single Mom said. Mafia boss threw his gun on the table and knelt. The neon sign of the diner flickered with a dying buzzing sound, casting an intermittent red glow over the wet asphalt of the parking lot. Inside, the air smelled permanently of burnt coffee and grease, a scent that had seeped into the very fibers of Alina's uniform. She wiped the counter with a rag that had seen better days, her movements mechanical and heavy with exhaustion. It was 2 a.m. The late shift was the only one that paid enough in tips to keep the lights on in her small apartment, but it cost her everything else. Alina paused, pressing a hand against her side where a fresh bruise bloomed violet beneath her sweater. She had worn long sleeves despite the humidity in the kitchen, terrified that a customer might see the purple marks on her arms. Rick had been angry again yesterday. It did not matter what the reason was. The toast was burnt, the rent was late, or simply that the sky was blue. Rick always found a reason to turn his frustration into physical force. She checked the clock on the wall. 10 minutes until she could leave. Her thoughts drifted to Lana, her 5-year-old daughter, currently sleeping at Mrs. Higgins' apartment 3 doors down from their own unit. Mrs. Higgins was kind, but she was old, and Alina hated burdening her this late, but she had no choice. She was a single mother in a city that chewed people up and spat them out, and she was doing everything she could just to keep them from drowning. The bell above the door chimed. Alina stiffened. She did not turn around immediately, praying it was just a truck driver looking for caffeine. "Come on, Allie, don't be like that." The voice made her stomach turn over. It was Rick. Alina turned slowly, gripping the rag like a shield. Rick stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with that sloppy, arrogant grin that used to charm her and now only terrified her. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from drink or something worse. "I'm working." "Rick," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "You need to leave. I just want to walk you to your car," he slurred. Stepping further inside, the diner was empty save for the cook in the back, who was wearing headphones and scrubbing the grill. "It's dangerous out there for a pretty girl." "The only danger here is you," she whispered, glancing toward the kitchen. "Please, if the manager sees you, I will lose this job. I need this job. Rick, for Lana." At the mention of their daughter, Rick's face darkened. He took a step toward the counter, his charm vanishing instantly. "Don't you use her against me. I have rights. I am her father." "You gave up those rights when you put me in the hospital," Alina said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Rick's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist across the counter. His grip was like iron. "You think you are better than me? You are nothing without me. Alina, nothing." Before the situation could escalate, the cook emerged from the back. Sensing the tension, Rick sneered, released her wrist with a shove, and backed away. "Fine, have it your way. I will be waiting outside." He turned and exited, the bell jingling cheerfully behind him. Alina stood frozen, rubbing her wrist. She felt sick. She waited 20 minutes after her shift officially ended, hoping he would get bored and leave. When she finally pushed open the back door, the alley was silent. The rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through her thin sweater instantly. She kept her head down, clutching her purse, walking quickly toward her rusted sedan parked under the lone, functioning street lamp. She was 10 feet away when a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. "Thought you could wait me out." Rick's voice was a growl now. Alina gasped, fumbling for her keys. "Rick, stop. I am calling the police." "Go ahead," he laughed, stepping closer. He reeked of cheap whiskey. "They won't come in time. They never do." He reached for her, his fingers hooking into the strap of her purse, jerking her backward. She screamed, slipping on the wet pavement, bracing for the impact of his fist. It never came. A figure appeared from the darkness, moving with a silence and speed that was terrifying to witness. One moment, Rick was looming over her, and the next, he was pinned against the brick wall, his feet dangling inches off the ground. Alina scrambled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man holding Rick was tall, dressed in a pristine black suit that seemed to absorb the light. He was not struggling. He held Rick, who was a large man, by the throat with one hand effortlessly, as if he were holding a rag doll. "The lady asked you to stop," the stranger said. His voice was low, a baritone rumble that vibrated through the alley. It was cold, devoid of anger, which made it infinitely more threatening. Rick clawed at the leather-gloved hand crushing his windpipe, gasping for air, his face turning a mottled shade of red. She is clearly terrified," the stranger interrupted. He leaned in closer to Rick. "If I see you near her again, I will not be this polite. Do you understand?" He released his grip. Rick collapsed to the wet ground, coughing and retching, scrambling on his hands and knees to get away. He looked up at the man in the suit with pure terror, then scrambled to his feet and ran into the night without looking back. Alina remained pressed against her car, trembling. The stranger turned to her. Under the harsh light of the street lamp, she saw his face properly for the first time. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark hair slicked back from a high forehead. But his eyes were what caught her. They were dark, intense, and ancient, holding a kind of weary violence that made her breath hitch. He looked like a predator who had decided, for the moment, not to hunt. For a second, something sparked in his expression. He narrowed his eyes, scanning her face, her wet hair, the bruise she tried to hide. He froze. "Alina," he whispered. It was barely a sound, carried away by the wind. She blinked, confused. "Do I know you?" His mask slammed back into place instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a stoic, impenetrable wall. "No," he said smoothly. "I apologize for the violence. I was passing by and saw you were in distress." "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice shaking. You didn't have to." "He would have hurt you," the man stated as a fact. He glanced at her car, taking in the rust and the dented fender. Then he looked at the dark, empty street. "You should not drive home in this state. You are shaking." "I am fine," she lied, though her teeth were chattering. "I will drive you," he said. It was not a request. He gestured toward a sleek black luxury sedan parked quietly at the mouth of the alley. It looked like it cost more than the entire diner. "I can't," Alina said, instinctively stepping back. "I don't know you. I have a daughter waiting for me." "Which is exactly why you need to get home safely," he countered. He opened the back door of his car. "Just this once. I will not ask for your name or address. You can tell me where to stop a block away if it makes you feel safer. But I am not leaving you here while that man is still loose in the neighborhood." There was something in his tone, an underlying steel, but also a strange, frantic need to ensure she was safe, that made her pause. She looked at her unreliable car, then at the darkness where Rick had disappeared. "Okay," she whispered, "just this once." The interior of his car smelled of expensive leather and cedar wood. It was warm and silent. The man drove with practiced ease. His hands relaxed on the steering wheel. Alina sat in the back, hugging her purse, watching the city blur by. "He hurts you," the man said after 10 minutes of silence. It wasn't a question. Alina looked at his eyes in the rearview mirror. "It is complicated." "It is never complicated," he replied, his jaw tightening, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Men like that are cowards. They only feel big when they make someone else feel small." Alina looked away, shame burning her cheeks. "He is my daughter's father." The car swerved slightly, then corrected. The man said nothing else for the rest of the ride. When they pulled up to her apartment complex, a row of crumbling brick buildings on the east side, Alina felt a pang of embarrassment. This man belonged in a penthouse, not here. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Wait." He put the car in park and got out, coming around to open the door for her. He held an umbrella he had produced from somewhere, shielding her from the rain. They walked to the entrance of her building. Just as Alina was fumbling for her keys, the front door opened. Mrs. Higgins stood there, looking relieved, with Lana hiding behind her legs. "Mama," Lana cried out, darting forward to hug Alina's legs. "Lana, baby, you should be asleep," Alina soothed. picking her daughter up. She looked at the man, expecting him to be impatient or disgusted by the domestic scene. Instead, he was staring at Lana with an expression of profound softness. The cold, hard lines of his face had melted. He looked human. Lana, usually shy with strangers, peeked over Alina's shoulder. She looked at the tall man in the dark suit and raised a small hand. She waved. The man blinked, slowly, tentatively. He raised his gloved hand and waved back. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Go inside, Alina," he said softly. "Lock the door." She nodded, rushing inside with Lana, locking the heavy deadbolt behind her. When she looked out the peephole, the black car was still there. It stayed there for an hour. The next morning was a blur of rushing. Lana had school, and Alina had a second shift at a laundromat before her night shift at the diner. As she was leaving the apartment, pushing a frantic Lana out the door, her foot kicked something on the welcome mat. It was a thick, plain white envelope. Alina frowned, picking it up. It was heavy. She tore the seal open and nearly dropped it. Inside was a stack of $100 bills. It had to be at least $5,000. There was no note. Her heart raced. This was enough for rent for 6 months. It was enough to fix the car. It was enough to run. But she knew where it came from. The man in the suit. "I can't keep this," she whispered to herself. She shoved the envelope deep into her purse. She spent the entire day looking over her shoulder, half expecting the police or criminals to come asking for the money. That night at the diner, the tension was unbearable. Every time the door chimed, she flinched. Rick did not show up, but he did. At 11 o'clock, the man from the alley walked in. He was not wearing a suit tonight. He wore a dark leather jacket and a charcoal shirt, looking less corporate and more dangerous. He sat in the corner booth, the one with the view of the entire room. He did not signal for her. He did not look at the menu. He just sat there, his dark eyes following her as she moved between the tables. He watched the way she rubbed her lower back. He watched the exhaustion pulling at her eyes. Alina took a deep breath, gripped the coffee pot, and walked over to him. "You left something at my door," she said quietly, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. She reached into her apron and pulled out the envelope, sliding it across the table. "I cannot accept this." He looked at the envelope, then up at her. "It is not charity. Consider it a loan, or back pay." "Back pay?" she asked, confused. "I don't work for you." He picked up the coffee, black, and took a sip. He looked at her over the rim of the cup, and suddenly, the lighting in the diner seemed to shift. The angle of his jaw, the way he held the cup, the scar that ran through his left eyebrow. She had missed it in the dark alley, but she saw it now. The memory hit her like a physical blow. 10 years ago, a storm. A boy hiding in the garden shed behind her foster parents' house. He was 16, bleeding from a stab wound in his side, shivering violently. Alina, only 15 herself, had sneaked out with bandages and leftovers. She had hidden him for 3 days. She had cleaned his wound. He had barely spoken, terrified and feral, but on the last night, he had promised her that he would never forget her. "Dante?" she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The man lowered the cup. "Hello, Alina." She stared at him, her mind reeling. The boy she remembered was skinny, broken and hunted. The man sitting before her radiated power. He occupied the space like a king on a throne. The suit, the car, the way he had handled Rick. It all made sense now. Look at you," she breathed. "You survived." "I did more than survive," Dante said. His voice was devoid of arrogance, just stating a simple truth. "And I looked for you. For a long time. I moved around," she said defensively. "After the foster system aged me out. It was hard." "I know," he said. "I know about Rick. I know about the debts. I know you were drowning. Alina." He placed a hand over the envelope she had returned. "Let me help you. You saved my life. Let me return the favor." Alina looked at the money, then at him. She saw the leather jacket, the hardness in his eyes, the way the other patrons unconsciously gave him a wide berth. She knew what he was. You didn't get that kind of power in this city by being a saint. "You are Mafia," she whispered, Or something like it. Dante did not deny it. He did not flinch. I am what I needed to be to survive. I own this city. Alina, nothing happens here without my permission. I can make Rick disappear. I can make sure Lana never wants anything again. The offer hung in the air, seductive and terrifying. Safety, security, no more fear. But she thought of Lana's innocent wave. She thought of the blood that surely stained the hands resting on the table. I can't, she said, her voice trembling. I have a daughter. Dante, I can't bring your world into hers. I don't want blood money. I don't want violence near her. Dante's expression tightened, a flash of pain crossing his eyes before he buried it. I would never let anything happen to her. Or you. You can't promise that, she said, backing away. Your life. It is a target. I want peace. Dante, just peace. She turned to walk away, her heart breaking for the boy she had once known, but terrified of the man he had become. Alina? He moved faster than she thought possible. He was out of the booth, his hand gently encircling her wrist. It wasn't a forceful grip like Rick's. It was warm, firm, and desperate. She froze, the heat of his touch sending a shockwave up her arm. She looked down at his hand, large and scarred, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. I'm not asking you to join my world, he said, his voice rough, dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. I am just asking you to let me stand between you and the things that want to hurt you. Alina looked up into his eyes. The diner faded away. For a moment, she didn't see the crime boss. She saw the boy in the shed, looking at her as if she were the only light in the universe. The tension between them pulled tight, a vibrating string. Her breath hitched. She should pull away. She should run, but she didn't. She stood there, her pulse hammering against his fingertips, caught in the gravity of a man who had walked through hell and come back for her. Please, he whispered. Alina stared at him, the word no dying on her lips, replaced by a silence that spoke volumes. The sound of shattering glass cut through the heavy silence of 3 in the morning, like a gunshot. Alina was awake instantly, her heart hammering against her ribs with a violence that made her chest ache. She did not scream. Years of living in fear had taught her that screaming only provoked them faster. Instead, she rolled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold linoleum, and moved with silent, desperate speed toward the bedroom door. She reached Lana's room just as the heavy thud of boots echoed in the hallway. Lana was shifting in her sleep, clutching her worn teddy bear. Alina slipped inside, locking the door and pressing her back against it, sliding down until she hit the floor. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept behind the dresser, her knuckles turning white around the handle. Ali! Rick's voice was a slur of rage and liquor, booming through the thin walls of the apartment. I know you are in there. Open the door. We need to talk about respect. Another crash followed, the sound of her grandmother's vase, one of the few nice things she owned, exploding against a wall. Lana sat up, rubbing her eyes, whimpering. Mommy? Shh, baby, Alina whispered, crawling over to the bed and pulling the blanket up over her daughter's head. It is just a nightmare. Cover your ears. Just like we practiced. Count to 100. Rick pounded on the bedroom door. The wood groaned and splintered under the force of his fist. Do not ignore me. I have rights. Alina dialed 911 with trembling fingers. She whispered her address, her voice cracking, begging them to hurry. For 10 agonizing minutes, Rick raged. He kicked the door, threw furniture, and screamed insults that made Alina's blood run cold. But then, sirens wailed in the distance. Rick cursed, the sound of his boots retreating toward the back window. By the time the blue and red lights flashed against the living room curtains, he was gone. Alina expected relief. Instead, she became indifferent. 2 officers stood in her wrecked living room. One was taking notes with a bored expression, while the other, a heavy-set man named Officer Miller, looked around with a sneer. Look, miss, Miller said, capping his pen. He did not hit you tonight, did he? He broke down my door, Alina said, her voice rising in hysteria. She pointed to the splintered wood. He destroyed my home. He was screaming. My daughter is terrified. It is a domestic dispute. Miller shrugged. He claims he still lives here, says he lost his key. It is his word against yours until we see a court order, and I do not see one on the table." "I have a restraining order pending," Alina argued. "He's dangerous." "Pending means nothing to me right now," Miller said, turning to leave. "Lock your windows. Call us if he comes back and actually does something." They left her standing in the wreckage of her life, shivering, clutching a crying Lana to her chest. The system had failed her. Again. Dante sat in the back of the town car, the morning sun reflecting off his dark sunglasses. He was reading a file on his tablet when his phone buzzed. It was his driver, Marco, who had been stationed outside Alina's building. Dante listened to the report in silence. His expression did not change, but the temperature in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. He hung up the phone and tapped the partition. "Change of plans," Dante said. "Take me to the 4th precinct." 20 minutes later, Dante walked into the police station. He did not wait at the front desk. He walked straight through the bullpen, his expensive Italian suit and the lethal aura radiating from him, parting the sea of uniformed officers like water. He found Officer Miller at his desk, eating a donut and laughing with a colleague. Dante stopped in front of the desk. He did not speak. He simply stared. Miller looked up, annoyed. "Can I help you, pal? Civilians stay behind the—" Dante moved. He grabbed Miller by the back of his neck and slammed his face into the desk. The sound was sickeningly loud. Papers flew everywhere. The station went silent. 3 officers stood up, hands reaching for their holsters, but Dante's men had filtered in behind him, silent and imposing. Dante leaned down, whispering into Miller's ear. "You went to an apartment on 4th Street last night. A woman named Alina. A child named Lana." Miller groaned, trying to struggle, but Dante's grip was immovable. "You told her to call you when he actually does something," Dante continued, his voice calm, conversational, and terrifying. "I am curious. Officer, what exactly were you waiting for? A corpse?" "Get off me," Miller sputtered. Dante pulled Miller's head up by his hair, forcing him to look him in the eye. "Open the case. Issue the warrant for Rick Sullivan. Assign a patrol car to sit outside her building 24/7 until he is in cuffs. If I hear that," she called, "and you did not answer, I will not come here next time. I will visit you at your house. I know your wife works at the bank downtown. I know your son plays soccer on Tuesdays." He released Miller, who slumped back, gasping and pale. "Do we have an understanding?" Dante asked, straightening his cuffs. Miller nodded frantically, unable to speak. Dante turned and walked out. No one stopped him. 2 hours later, there was a knock on Alina's door. She flinched, grabbing the bat again. "Alina, it is Dante." She opened the door a crack. Dante stood there, looking immaculate, though there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there the night before. Behind him were 2 large men who looked like they chewed concrete for breakfast. "Pack a bag," Dante said. "What?" Alina blinked, still wearing her pajamas, her hair a mess. "Why?" "Rick will be back," Dante said, stepping into the apartment without asking. He looked at the broken vase, the splintered door frame, and his jaw tightened until a muscle jumped. "The police have issued a warrant, but paper does not stop a bullet, and it does not stop a man like him. You are not safe here." "I can't just leave," Alina protested, following him as he walked toward the bedroom. "My job, Lana's school." Dante stopped and turned to her. "Your job can wait. Lana can miss a few days of kindergarten. What she cannot do is watch her mother get hurt, or worse." He gestured to the broken door. He escalated. "Alina, next time. He won't just break a vase." Alina looked at Lana, who was sitting on the couch, watching Dante with wide eyes. She knew he was right. She had no money to fix the door. She had no one to call. She was a sitting duck. "Where?" she asked. Her voice small. "I have a place," Dante said. "Secure. Private. No one knows about it but me." The drive took 40 minutes. They went from the crumbling gray streets of her neighborhood to the gleaming steel spires of the financial district. Dante led them into a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. It was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. The floors were white marble, the furniture modern and plush. It was beautiful, cold, and felt like a fortress. "There is food in the fridge," Dante said, placing her battered suitcase on the floor. "The security system is state-of-the-art. No one gets up here unless I authorize it. You are safe." Alina stood in the middle of the vast living room, holding Lana's hand. She felt small. "Why are you doing this?" Dante looked at her, his dark eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "Because I promised I would." The first few days were a strange blur of anxiety and luxury. Alina felt like an imposter in the pristine condo. She jumped at every noise, expecting Rick to burst through the heavy steel doors. But the only person who came was Dante. He visited every evening. He brought groceries. He brought toys for Lana. On the fourth night, Alina was trying to cook dinner, but her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the pasta sauce. The jar shattered, red sauce splattering across the white marble like a crime scene. She gasped, dropping to her knees to clean it up, tears stinging her eyes. "Stupid, stupid," she muttered. "Leave it." Dante was there. She hadn't heard him enter. He knelt beside her, taking the paper towels from her trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I will clean it. I didn't mean to—" "Alina," he said firmly. He caught her hand, stopping her frantic movements. "It is just sauce. Breathe." He cleaned the mess himself, wiping the floor with a grace that belied his size. Then he stood up and washed his hands. "Sit down, I will cook." Alina sat at the kitchen island, watching him. He took off his suit jacket, rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, and went to work. He moved around the kitchen with confidence, chopping garlic, boiling water, searing meat. Lana wandered in. Holding a puzzle box, she stood shyly by the counter. "Mr. Dante," she whispered. Dante paused, the knife hovering over a tomato. He turned to her. "Yes. Lana? Can you help me? I can't find the corner piece." Alina started to stand up. "Lana, honey, let him cook." "It is fine," Dante said. He put the knife down. He walked over to the small coffee table where Lana had spread out the pieces. The powerful mafia boss, the man who terrified police officers, sat down on the expensive rug in his tailored trousers. He studied the pieces with intense concentration. "Ah, this one," he said, picking up a blue piece. "It is part of the sky." He guided Lana's hand to snap it into place. Lana giggled. Dante smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his face. Alina watched them, her chest tightening. It was a scene she had dreamed of but never thought she would have. A father figure, a protector. For a moment. The fear of Rick faded, replaced by a warm, aching longing. 2 nights later, Alina woke up thirsty. The digital clock read 2 a.m. She padded out to the kitchen in her oversized t-shirt to get a glass of water. The kitchen light was on, dim and low. Dante was standing by the sink. He had not left that evening. He often stayed late, working in the study, but usually he was gone by the time she woke up. He was shirtless. Alina froze in the doorway, her breath hitched in her throat. His back was to her. A landscape of muscle and scars. There were old, faded lines from his childhood, the ones she remembered from the garden shed, and newer. Jagged marks from a life of violence. A tattoo of a black archangel covered his right shoulder blade. He was scrubbing his hands under the faucet. The water running into the sink was pink. He turned off the tap and grabbed a towel, drying his hands aggressively. Then he sensed her. He turned around slowly. Alina's eyes widened. His knuckles were raw, the skin split and bruised. There was a smear of fresh blood on his chest, stark against the tan skin. He saw her looking. He did not cover himself. He did not apologize. He stood there, bare and lethal, letting her see the reality of him. "Dante," she whispered, "you're hurt. It is not my blood," he said. His voice was raspy, tired. The implication hung heavy in the air. He had been out. He had hurt someone. Maybe he had hurt Rick. Maybe he had hurt someone else. Alina took a step back. The domestic fantasy of the puzzle piece and the pasta dinner shattered. This was a predator, a killer. But as her eyes met his, she didn't just feel fear. She felt a magnetic pull so strong it made her knees weak. The raw masculinity of him, the danger, The fact that he had walked through violence and come back to this kitchen to guard her. It was intoxicating. Dante tossed the towel on the counter. He took a step toward her. His eyes dropped to her bare legs, then back up to her face. The hunger in his gaze was naked and terrifying. "Go back to bed. Alina," he warned, his voice low. She swallowed hard, her heart racing. She nodded, unable to speak, and retreated to her room. The image of his bloody knuckles and burning eyes seared into her mind. The storm hit the city a week after they moved in. It was a torrential downpour that battered the glass windows of the penthouse, turning the city lights into smeared streaks of color. At 9 in the evening, the power cut out. The entire building went dark. "Mommy!" Lana cried out from her room. Alina rushed to her, scooping her up. "It is okay, sweetie. Just a blackout. Look, the city is dark too." She brought Lana into the living room and lit the emergency candles Dante had shown her. The flickering amber light cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. Eventually, Lana fell asleep on the sofa, clutching her bear. The front door crashed open. Alina jumped, gasping. Dante stumbled in. He was soaking wet, his suit jacket missing, his white shirt plastered to his skin and translucent with rain. He was breathing hard, his hair matted to his forehead. He slammed the door and locked it, engaging the heavy deadbolt. He leaned his forehead against the wood for a second, composing himself, before turning to scan the room. His eyes were wild. "Dante?" Alina stood up, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Lana. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing her by the shoulders. His grip was tight, painful. "Are you okay? Did anyone come here?" "No," she stammered. "Just the lights." "Dante, you are shaking." He was vibrating with adrenaline. There was a cut on his cheekbone that was bleeding sluggishly. "Ambush," he gritted out. "They knew my route. Someone talked." He looked at the window, then back at her. "I need to move you again. They might know about this place." "No!" Alina pushed against his chest. "Stop it, Dante. You cannot just keep dragging us from place to place. You said we would be safe here." "Nowhere is safe," he snapped, his voice rising. "Not while Rick is talking to my enemies. Not while there is a price on my head. Then why did you bring us into this?" Alina demanded, anger flaring hot and bright. "You brought your war to my doorstep? I was just a waitress." "Dante, now I am a target because of you." "You were already a target," he roared back, the thunder outside punctuating his words. "Rick would have killed you by now. I am the only reason you are still breathing. You are the reason I am terrified," she cried. "I look at you, and I don't know if you are my savior or just another monster." The word hung in the air. Monster. Dante's face crumbled, the anger drained out of him, leaving only a stark, jagged desolation. He let go of her shoulders and stepped back, his hands raising in surrender. "You are right," he whispered. The rain drummed relentlessly against the glass. "I should go. I will send Marco to watch the door." He turned to leave. "Wait." Alina didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, the same look the boy in the shed had worn 10 years ago, the look of someone who believed they were unlovable. She reached out, grabbing his wet shirt. He stopped. "Don't go," she whispered. She stepped closer. In the candlelight, the cut on his cheek looked stark. Without thinking, she reached up, her thumb brushing the droplet of blood away. Dante shuddered at her touch. He closed his eyes, leaning into her hand. "Alina, do not do this. I am dangerous." "I know," she said. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I know." He opened his eyes. The distance between them vanished. The argument, the fear, the violence outside, it all funneled into a singular, electric point of contact. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. His touch was reverent, but his eyes were ravenous. "Alina," he groaned. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the taste of rain, copper, and desperation. Alina gasped, opening to him, her hands bunching in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. He groaned low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly off the floor, pressing her body against the hard wall of his chest. It was slow, deep, and overwhelming. It was a release of 10 years of silence and a week of suffocating tension. For a moment, nothing existed but the heat of his mouth and the strength of his arms. "Mommy?" The small, sleepy voice cut through the room like a knife. Alina and Dante broke apart instantly. They stood heaving, chests rising and falling, staring at each other with wide, blown pupils. Lana was sitting up on the couch, rubbing her eyes, looking confused in the candlelight. Alina brought a hand to her swollen lips, guilt washing over her cold and sharpness. What was she doing? Kissing a mafia boss while her daughter slept 5 feet away? Kissing a man who had come home with blood on his hands? She stepped back, putting distance between them. "Lana, I'm here. Baby, I'm here." Dante stood frozen. He looked at his hands, then at Alina's fearful expression. The mask slammed back down. He straightened his spine, becoming the cold, distant statue once more. He looked at Alina one last time. His eyes were sad, deep pools of regret. "I am not a monster. Alina," he said softly, his voice cracking slightly, "but I have done monstrous things to protect what is mine." He turned and walked into the shadows of the hallway, leaving her standing in the flickering candlelight, her heart torn completely in two. The morning sun that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse was not warm. It was pale and clinical, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silence. Alina woke up alone. The sheets on the other side of the expansive bed had not been slept in, but the pillow still held the faint, earthy scent of cedarwood and rain, Dante's scent. She sat up, her head throbbing with the phantom memory of the power outage, the storm, and the kiss that had nearly unmade her. The apartment was quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator in the distance. She walked out to the living room, wrapping her arms around herself, feeling small in the vast, expensive space. On the dining table, sitting squarely in the center of the polished mahogany, was a thick manila folder. Beside it sat a fresh cup of coffee, still steaming, and a single croissant on a china plate. Alina approached the table slowly. She sat down and opened the folder. It was a dossier. The name Richard Sulliver was printed at the top of the first page. As Alina turned the pages, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning settled into her bones. It was everything. It was a meticulous, terrifyingly detailed chronicle of Rick's life. There were photos of him meeting with loan sharks in back alleys. There were bank statements showing his gambling losses. There were copies of police reports from 3 different counties, assault charges that had been dropped, drunk driving incidents that had vanished, and a restraining order from a woman in Jersey City 5 years ago. Dante had not just investigated Rick, he had dissected him. She reached the final page. Clipped to the back was a series of photographs taken yesterday. Rick, standing outside a warehouse in the industrial district, shaking hands with a man who had a snake tattoo winding up his neck. Alina closed the folder, her hands trembling. This was not just protection, this was warfare. Dante was hunting Rick with the precision of a surgeon, and while part of her felt a rush of vindictive gratitude, a larger part was terrified. This file represented a level of power and surveillance that felt suffocating. She could not just sit here and wait for him to come back covered in blood again. She needed to look him in the eye. She needed to understand where the line was drawn between safety and control. The Obsidian Club was a fortress of black marble and gold velvet located in the heart of the city's nightlife district. It was a place where politicians drank scotch with mobsters, and where the music was always loud enough to drown out secrets. It was 2 p.m, hours before opening, but the heavy oak doors were unlocked. Alina pushed her way in, clutching the folder against her chest like a shield. The interior was dim, lit only by the amber glow of the bar lights. Dust sheets covered some of the tables, giving the place a ghostly, abandoned feel. In the back, near the VIP section, she saw movement. Dante stood by the bar, reviewing paperwork with a shorter, older man with graying hair. His consigliere, Dante, looked exhausted. He had changed into a fresh suit, charcoal gray, but his posture was rigid. "We need to cut the supply lines by Friday," Dante was saying, his voice low and raspy. "If the Moretti family thinks they can move product through the docks, they are—" He stopped. He sensed her before he saw her. He turned slowly, and his eyes widened in disbelief. "Alina?" He moved toward her, not with a welcoming smile, but with a frown of confusion. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the safe house. Marco was supposed to—" "I slipped out while Marco was checking the perimeter," she said, lifting her chin. "I found the file. Dante, I needed to talk to you. You walked here?" He looked at the door, then back at her, his expression darkening. "Alina, you cannot just walk around the city. Do you have any idea who is looking for you?" "I am not a prisoner," she argued, stepping forward, "and I am not a piece on a chessboard. You investigated Rick without telling me. You're planning things, violent things, and I'm just sitting in a tower waiting for—" The front window of the club exploded. It happened in slow motion. 1 second, the air was thick with the smell of stale whiskey and tension. The next, a deafening crash shattered the world. Shards of glass, glittering like diamonds, sprayed inward with violent force. "Down!" Dante did not hesitate. He tackled Alina, his heavy frame slamming into hers, driving her to the floor behind the thick oak bar. He covered her body with his own, shielding her head with his hand. Pop, 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 gunfire. It was not the cinematic roar of machine guns, but the sharp, terrifying crack of pistols firing from a moving vehicle. Bullets chewed into the woodwork above their heads, sending splinters raining down on Dante's suit jacket. A bottle of expensive scotch on the shelf above them exploded, showering them in amber liquid and glass. Alina screamed, curling into a ball, her face pressed against the cold tile floor. Dante was a heavy, immovable weight on top of her, a human barricade. He was not shaking. He was rigid, tense, waiting. Then, silence. Tires screeched outside, fading into the distance. "Stay down," Dante growled into her ear. "Boss," the consigliere's voice called out from behind an overturned table. "They are gone. Drive by. A warning." Dante slowly lifted himself off her. He checked her instantly, his hands frantic as they patted down her arms, her back, her legs. "Are you hit? Alina, look at me. Are you hit?" I don't think so," she gasped, her ears ringing. She looked around. The club was a ruin of broken glass and spilled liquor. A single bullet hole was punched into the wall exactly where she had been standing 10 seconds ago. She stared at it, the reality of it crashing down on her. She could have died. Lana would have been an orphan. Dante saw her looking at the bullet hole. A terrifying transformation came over him. The concern in his eyes vanished, replaced by a volcanic, blinding fury. He grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet. He didn't speak. He dragged her, half stumbling, toward the back of the club, through a heavy velvet curtain and into a private office. He kicked the door shut and locked it. Then he spun around and pushed her back against the wall. It wasn't gentle. It was the rough, desperate shove of a man who had just watched his world nearly end. "Are you insane?" he roared, his voice cracked, raw with terror. "You walked here? Alone? Do you see that hole in the wall, Alina? That was meant for me, but it would have gone through you just as easily." Alina was trembling, adrenaline flooding her system. "I didn't know." "You didn't know?" He stepped closer, trapping her, his hands slamming against the wall on either side of her head. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He smelled of scotch and gunpowder. "This is not a game. This is not a movie. These people kill without blinking. I have spent every waking second trying to keep you out of the line of fire, and you walk right into the kill zone to return a folder?" "I was scared," she yelled back, tears spilling over. "I was scared of you, Dante, of what you were doing, of the file. I am doing it to keep you alive." He leaned his forehead against hers, his anger bleeding into something agonizingly vulnerable. His hands were shaking now. "You could have died. You could have died. And I would have had to watch. But I didn't," she whispered. She looked at him, at the fear in his dark eyes, the cut on his cheek that had opened up again. She saw the monster he claimed to be, but she also saw the man who had just used his own body to shield her from bullets. The fear in the room shifted, it curdled, thickened, and ignited into something else. Alina reached up and grabbed the lapels of his ruined jacket. She didn't think so. She just needed to feel that they were both still breathing. Dante made a low, wounded sound in his throat. He crashed his mouth down on hers. This kiss was nothing like the one in the apartment. That had been tentative. A question. This was an answer. It was fiery, urgent, and desperate. It was a collision of survival instincts and undeniable attraction. Alina gasped against his lips, opening to him. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, needing the solid weight of him to anchor her spinning world. Dante groaned, his hands leaving the wall to tangle in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. He devoured her. His mouth moved from her lips to her jaw, trailing hot, open-mouthed kisses down the sensitive column of her neck. Alina's head fell back against the wall, a ragged sigh escaping her lips. She felt his teeth graze her skin, a possessive, primal claim that sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. His hands slid down her back, pressing her hips against his. She could feel the hard ridge of a gun holstered at his waist, a cold reminder of who he was. But in this moment, even the violence was part of the allure. He was dangerous. Yes, but he was dangerous for her. "Dante," she breathed, her voice wrecked. He froze. The sound of her voice, breathless and needy, seemed to snap him out of the trance. He went still, his forehead resting against her collarbone. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then he pulled back. He stepped away from her as if he had been burned. He ran a hand through his hair, turning his back to her. His shoulders were heaving. "No," he whispered roughly. "Not like this." Alina stood against the wall, her lips swollen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Dante?" He turned to look at her. His eyes were black pools of desire, but his expression was resolute. "I will not take you in the back room of a club like some cheap fling, and I will not touch you while you are shaking from fear." He adjusted his jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he buttoned it. "You are reacting to the adrenaline. Alina, you are afraid, and you are looking for comfort. I will not exploit that." "It wasn't just fear," she said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Maybe not," he said, his voice softer now. "But until you are safe, truly safe, I cannot be distracted. And you?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You are the greatest distraction I have ever known." He walked to the door and unlocked it. "Stay here. I will have the car brought around to the back. I am taking you back to the condo, and this time, Marco will stand inside the hallway." Dante did not ride back with her. He stayed at the club. In the ruins of the Obsidian, Dante stood amidst the broken glass. His consigliere, Silvio, swept away debris with a broom, looking grim. "It was the Moretti faction," Silvio said quietly. "They are using Rick Sulliver as a pawn. They know he has a connection to the girl. They think if they squeeze her, they squeeze you." Dante stared at the bullet hole in the wall. He touched it with his finger. It was too close, far too close. "I'm done playing defense," Dante said. His voice was devoid of emotion, cold as the grave. "Rick is the key. He is the weak link. He is desperate, and desperate men make mistakes." "What do you want to do?" Silvio asked. "We give him what he wants," Dante said. "We set a trap. We leaked information that I am moving a shipment of cash through the old rail yard on Friday. We make sure Rick hears about it. He will tell Moretti. They will come to take it. And when will they get there?" Dante turned, his face a mask of stone. "When they get there, I will burn them all to the ground." Across the city, in a dimly lit motel room that smelled of mildew and stale smoke, Rick Sulliver paced back and forth. He looked worse than ever. His eyes were sunken, his clothes stained. He took a swig from a flask and looked at the man sitting on the bed. The man was wearing a sharp suit and cleaning his fingernails with a knife. It was one of the Moretti lieutenants. "You said you would hurt him," Rick spat. "You said you would take him out today." "We sent a message," the lieutenant said calmly. "Dante needs to know he is vulnerable." "I don't care about messages," Rick screamed, throwing the flask against the wall. "I want my daughter back. He stole her. He stole my wife." "Ex-girlfriend," the lieutenant corrected boredly. "And relax. Rick, we have a plan. We heard a rumor. A big shipment. Friday night. Once we take Dante's money, he will be weak. And when he is weak, You can walk right into that penthouse and take whatever you want." Rick stopped pacing. A twisted smile slowly spread across his face. "Everything?" "Everything," the lieutenant promised. 2 days later, the waiting was agony. Alina felt like a ghost haunting the penthouse. Dante had not returned. He called to check on Lana, his voice brief and professional, but he did not come to the apartment. Alina needed to talk to someone who wasn't a bodyguard or a 5-year-old. She convinced Marco to let her make a phone call. She called Sarah, the waitress who worked the morning shift at the diner. Sarah was the closest thing she had to a best friend. "Allie? Oh my God, where have you been?" Sarah's voice was tinny through the phone. "The manager's threatening to fire you. Rick came by twice, screaming his head off." "I am safe, Sarah," Alina said, curling up in the window seat, watching the city lights below. "I am staying with a friend." "A friend?" Sarah paused. "Is this the friend who drives the car that costs more than my life? The hot suit guy?" Alina laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Yes, that friend. Allie, talk to me. You sound weird." "I am scared, Sarah," Alina confessed, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. "I am so scared. His world, it is violent. People shoot at him. He has enemies everywhere." "Then leave," Sarah said. "Come to my place. We will figure it out." "I can't," Alina whispered. "It is not just that I can't leave because of Rick. It is—" She hesitated, struggling to find the words. "When the bullets were flying, he didn't run. He covered me. He put his body between me and the gun. No one has ever done that for me, Sarah. My whole life. I have been the one shielding everyone else. With him, I feel seen. I feel safe, even when the world is exploding." "Oh, Allie," Sarah sighed. "You are falling for him." "I think I fell for him 10 years ago," Alina admitted, tears pricking her eyes. "And I am terrified that this time, one of us isn't going to make it out alive." The line was silent for a moment. Then Sarah spoke, her voice gentle. "Just be careful. Honey, monsters can be princes, but they still have claws." Alina hung up the phone. She looked out at the sprawling, dark city. Somewhere out there, Dante was plotting a war, and she knew, with a sinking certainty, that the storm was far from over. It was just holding its breath. The city was a living, breathing beast that never slept. But the countryside was a different creature entirely. It was vast, silent, and indifferent to the chaos of human lives. Dante had driven them himself, leading a convoy of 3 black SUVs 2 hours north, past the sprawling suburbs and into the deep, wooded hills where the roads turned from asphalt to gravel. The estate was a fortress disguised as a manor house. Stone walls covered in ivy, iron gates that looked decorative but could stop a truck, and acres of land patrolled by men who moved like shadows. For the first 2 days, the silence was deafening. Alina walked the halls of the large house, hugging her cardigan around herself, waiting for the sound of sirens or shattering glass, but there was only the wind in the pines and the distant call of a hawk. Dante was different here. The sharp, predatory edge he wore in the city seemed to dull slightly, replaced by a quiet vigilance. He did not wear his suit jackets. He rolled his sleeves up. He chopped wood for the oversized fireplace in the living room, the physical exertion a way to burn off the energy that constantly hummed beneath his skin. It was on the 3rd afternoon that the knot in Alina's chest finally began to loosen. She had been looking for Lana. Walking through the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, she heard low voices coming from the sunroom, a glass-walled enclosure that overlooked the rose garden. Alina stopped in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. Dante was sitting on a low leather ottoman, his long legs stretched out. Lana sat on the floor between his knees, a small frown of concentration on her face. In her hands, she held 3 strips of leather cord. "Like this?" Lana asked, her voice small. "Almost," Dante said. His voice was a low rumble, patient and incredibly gentle. "You have to pull the left one over the middle one tight. Otherwise, the braid will be loose." He reached down, his large, scarred hands covering her tiny ones. He guided her fingers with a delicacy that made Alina's breath catch in her throat. This was a man who could break bones with those hands. A man she had seen threaten a police officer without blinking. And here he was, teaching a 5-year-old how to braid leather. My Nona taught me this, Dante said softly. She said it keeps your mind quiet when the world is too loud. Lana looked up at him, her eyes wide. Is your world loud, Mr. Dante? Dante paused. He looked out at the garden, his expression unreadable for a moment before he looked back down at the child. Sometimes, Piccola, but it is quiet now. Alina felt tears prick her eyes. She stepped back into the shadows of the library, unable to watch anymore without weeping. It was a domestic tableau she had never thought she would see, a glimpse of a life that had been stolen from her before it even began. That evening, the air turned crisp. The estate was bathed in the silver light of a full moon. The stars spilled across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Lana had fallen asleep early, exhausted by the fresh air and the safety of the house. Alina found Dante on the back terrace. He was leaning against the stone railing, a glass of red wine in his hand, looking out at the dark tree line. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, looking younger, less like a mafia boss and more like the boy she had met in the garden shed 10 years ago. She walked up beside him. He didn't jump. He had known she was there the moment she opened the door. She likes you, Alina said softly. Dante took a sip of wine, his eyes fixed on the horizon. She is a good kid. She deserves better than this. She thinks you are a hero, Alina said. She rested her elbows on the cold stone railing. She told me you know how to fix everything. Dante let out a short, bitter laugh. Kids see what they want to see. She doesn't see the blood. Alina, she just sees the magic tricks. I see the blood, Alina said, turning to look at his profile. And I still feel safe. Dante turned his head. The moonlight cast shadows across the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the scar on his eyebrow. You shouldn't... You saw what happened at the club. My world is afire. Alina, eventually, everyone gets burned. Why didn't you come for me sooner? The question hung in the night air, heavy and fragile. Dante looked down at his glass, swirling the dark liquid. He was silent for a long time, so long that Alina thought he wouldn't answer. I found you 4 years ago, he confessed, his voice rough. I knew you were in the city. I knew you were working at the diner. I even knew about Rick. Alina felt a jolt of shock. You knew? And you stayed away? Look at me. Alina. He gestured to himself. The tattoos peeking out from his sleeve, the hardness in his eyes, the sheer weight of violence that clung to him. I was 19 when I killed my first man. By the time I was 25, I was running the underworld. I was rotting from the inside out. I remembered you as the only clean thing in my life, the only person who ever helped me without asking for a price. He turned fully toward her, his expression tortured. I wanted to come to you every single day, but I told myself that if I stayed away, you would have a normal life. I thought I was protecting you from me. I thought I was the pollution. So you let me struggle? Elena asked, her voice trembling, not with anger, but with sorrow. You watched me get hurt by Rick because you thought you were worse. I thought I was dead. Alina, he whispered, I thought if I touched you, I would destroy you. Alina stepped closer. The distance between them was charged with a decade of silence and longing. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and placed her palm against his cheek. His skin was warm, rough with stubble. He flinched, closing his eyes as he leaned into her touch, like a starving man offered bread. You are not that boy in the shed anymore, she said fiercely. And you are not a monster. You are the man who stopped a bullet for me. You are the man who braided leather with my daughter. Dante opened his eyes. They were dark, swimming with an emotion too vast to name. Alina, I don't want a normal life, she whispered. I just want a life where I am not afraid, and the only time I am not afraid is when I am with you. The wine glass was set down on the railing with a sharp clink. Dante reached for her. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. He looked at her as if he were memorizing her, mapping every freckle, every eyelash. I tried so hard to stay away, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. God help me, I tried. Stop trying, she breathed. He kissed her. It was gentle this time. It wasn't the desperate, adrenaline-fueled collision of the club. It was soft, slow, and tasting of wine and redemption. It was a question asked and answered in the silence of the night. He pulled back slightly, searching her eyes for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he swept her up into his arms. Alina gasped, wrapping her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck where his pulse beat strong and steady. He carried her inside, through the silent house, and up the stairs to the master bedroom. The room was bathed in shadows. Dante set her down on the edge of the bed. He moved with a reverence that made her heart ache. He didn't rush. He knelt before her, untying her shoes, sliding them off one by one. His hands moved up her calves, his touch searing through her jeans. When he stood to kiss her again, the heat between them spiked, burning away the cold fear of the last week. Clothes were discarded in whispers of fabric. When skin met skin, it felt like coming home. Dante made love to her with a focus that was overwhelming. He worshipped her body, his hands mapping every curve, his lips pressing against old scars as if to heal them. He was powerful, his body heavy and hard over hers, but he held back his strength, moving with a restrained, agonizing slowness that drove her to the brink. "Alina!" He groaned against her throat, his voice stripped of all command, leaving only raw need. "You are mine. You have always been mine. I'm yours," she sobbed, clinging to his shoulders, arching into him. "I'm yours. Dante." The climax, when it came, was not just physical. It was a release of years of loneliness, a shattering of the walls they had both built. Alina cried out, the sound muffled by his kiss, as the world narrowed down to the man holding her, anchoring her to the earth. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, limbs heavy and intertwined. Dante pulled the duvet over them, tucking her against his chest. He kissed the top of her head, his arm draped protectively over her waist. "I will never leave you again," he promised into the darkness. Alina closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, and for the first time in 10 years, she slept without dreaming of running. The morning sun was blinding. It streamed across the bed, waking Alina with a gentle warmth. She stretched, feeling the delicious ache in her muscles, and smiled before she even opened her eyes. She was alone in the bed, but she could hear the shower running in the ensuite bathroom. She rolled over, hugging Dante's pillow, inhaling his scent. She felt light. She felt new. The shower stopped. A moment later, Dante walked out, a towel wrapped low around his hips, water dripping from his dark hair. He looked younger this morning. The lines of tension around his mouth smoothed away. He saw her awake and paused, a slow, devastatingly handsome smile spreading across his face. "Good morning. Good morning," she whispered, pulling the sheet up to her chin. Suddenly shy, Dante walked over to the bed, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I am going to make breakfast. Pancakes for Lana, coffee for us. Do not move until I come back. I could get used to this," she teased. "Get used to it," he said firmly. "This is the rest of our lives." He pulled on fresh clothes, jeans and a gray t-shirt, and headed downstairs. Alina lay back, listening to his footsteps, letting the happiness wash over her. It felt fragile. This joy, like a soap bubble floating over jagged rocks, but she refused to pop it. 20 minutes later, she was dressed and heading down the grand staircase. She could smell bacon and coffee. She reached the bottom landing just as the heavy front door burst open. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the casual opening of a door. It was a frantic, violent breach. Alina froze on the stairs. Marco, Dante's head of security, stumbled into the foyer. He was pale, breathless, and there was a smear of blood on his forehead. He wasn't at the estate. He had been part of the convoy sent to the city that morning. The convoy taking Lana to the private school to retrieve her transfer records so she could be enrolled locally. Dante appeared from the kitchen, a spatula in his hand, a smile still lingering on his face. He saw Marco, and the smile died an instant. Gruesome death. The spatula clattered to the floor. "Marco?" Dante's voice was ice. "Boss," Marco gasped, clutching the door frame. "We were hit. The bridge. They blocked us in." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees gave out, and she gripped the banister to keep from falling. "Where is she?" she whispered. "Where is Lana?" Dante moved. He was across the foyer in a blur, grabbing Marco by the lapels of his tactical vest. "Where is the girl? Marco?" "It was Rick," Marco choked out, shame burning in his eyes. "And the Moretti crew. They had a heavy team. We took losses. They grabbed her out of the back seat. We couldn't stop them." A sound ripped from Alina's throat, a high, keening wail that echoed off the high ceilings. She collapsed onto the stairs, curling into herself, her hands clawing at her hair. No, you promised she was safe." Dante didn't look at Alina. He couldn't. The rage that overtook him was not human. It was a demonic, volcanic force. He shoved Marco back, turning blindly toward the hallway. A large, ornate mirror hung on the wall, an antique, gilded thing. Dante roared, a sound of pure, animalistic fury, and punched the mirror. The glass shattered with a sickening crunch. Shards rained down onto the marble floor. Dante didn't stop. He punched the wall beside it, the drywall cracking under his fist. Blood, his blood, began to drip from his knuckles, splattering onto the pristine floor, mixing with the glitter of broken glass. "Dante!" Marco shouted. Stepping forward, Dante spun around. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild and terrifying, burning with a fire that promised death to the entire world. His hand was a ruin of torn skin and blood, but he didn't seem to feel it. He looked up at Alina, who was sobbing on the stairs, broken and gasping for air. He walked over to the foot of the stairs. He didn't touch her. He was too bloody, too volatile. But he fell to his knees, bringing himself to her level. "Alina," he rasped. She looked up, her eyes red, her face wet with tears. "You promised," she choked out. You said... Dante stood up slowly. He turned to Marco, his voice dropping to a register that was terrifyingly calm. "Get the car. Call Silvio. Call everyone. Wake up every sleeper agent, every debt, every favor." He looked back at the shattered mirror, seeing his own fractured reflection. He wiped his bloody hand on his jeans, leaving a dark smear. "I will burn this city to ash," Dante vowed, the words vibrating with lethal intent. "I will kill every single one of them." He looked at Alina, his eyes locking onto hers. "I will bring her home," he said, each word a hammer blow. "Alive, or I will die today." The library of the countryside estate, once a sanctuary of silence and old paper, had been transformed into a war room. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, ozone from overheating servers, and the metallic tang of gun oil. Dante stood over a sprawling map of the city spread across the mahogany desk. He had not sat down in 7 hours. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tension in his forearms, every muscle coiled tight as a steel cable. He was barking orders into a phone, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that made the hardened men in the room flinch. "I do not care about the political fallout," Dante snarled into the receiver. "I do not care if you have to burn every Port Authority manifest in the state. Find the car, find the location, or I will start taking fingers." He slammed the phone down, the plastic casing cracking under the force. In the corner of the room, huddled on a leather armchair that looked too big for her, sat Alina. She was wrapped in a blanket, shivering despite the roaring fire. She wasn't crying anymore. She had passed the point of tears hours ago. Now, she was just hollow, staring at the floor with eyes that saw nothing but her daughter's terrified face as the car had been taken. Silvio, the consigliere, approached Dante cautiously. "Boss, we have a ping, a burner phone used by one of Moretti's lieutenants. It is active in the industrial district. Warehouse 419, the old cannery." Dante looked up. The fire in his eyes flared, cold and deadly. "Are you sure? It is the only signal coming out of that sector. Heat signatures confirm movement inside. 12 to 15 hostiles. One small thermal signature in the office on the second floor. Lana?" Dante nodded once. Gear up. We leave in 5 minutes. He turned away from the map and walked across the room toward Alina. The bustling activity in the library seemed to part around him, his men giving him a wide berth. He stopped in front of her chair. Alina looked up slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. She looked at him, and for the first time since they had met, he saw fear directed at him. Not fear of his world, but fear of his failure. "Alina," he said softly. "I should have gone with her," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I should have been in the car. I let you convince me she was safe." "I thought she was," Dante said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "You promised," she said, her voice rising, trembling with a grief that sounded like fury. She stood up, the blanket falling to the floor. She poked a finger into his hard chest. "You looked me in the eye and you promised to protect me. You promised to protect her." The room went silent. The soldiers, the tech experts, the guards, everyone froze, looking away, expecting the boss to explode. Dante stared at her. He saw the betrayal in her eyes, and it cut deeper than any knife he had ever felt. Slowly, deliberately. He reached to his hip. He unholstered his custom semi-automatic pistol. The heavy, black metal gleamed in the firelight. He threw it on the low table between them. The gun hit the wood with a heavy, dull thud that echoed in the silence. It was a gesture of total surrender, a stripping away of his power. Dante sank to his knees. The man who ruled the city, the man who made police captains tremble, knelt on the rug before the sobbing waitress. He took her cold, trembling hands in his own warm, scarred ones. He did not look away. "I failed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I let my guard down. I let you believe that my power was enough to keep the wolves away. I was arrogant, and Lana is paying the price." Alina stared down at him, her breath hitching. "But hear me now," Dante vowed, squeezing her hands tight. "I will fix it. I am going to that warehouse, and I am going to walk through hell to get her. I will bring her back to you. Alina, I will bring her home, or I will die trying." He stood up. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a lethal resolve that was terrifying to behold. He picked up the gun, checked the chamber, and slid it back into his holster. He turned to his men. "Move out. No mercy." The warehouse was a rusted skeleton of steel and corrugated iron sitting on the edge of the black water of the harbor. Rain lashed against the metal roof, masking the sound of the 3 SUVs cutting their engines a block away. Dante moved through the shadows of the shipping containers like a wraith. He wore a tactical vest over his black shirt, and he carried an assault rifle with a practiced ease. Beside him, Marco and a dozen other men moved in formation, silent and deadly. "2 guards at the north entrance," Marco whispered into his comms. "Drop them," Dante ordered. 2 suppressed shots coughed in the darkness. The guards slumped to the wet pavement. Dante signaled the breach. They moved to the side door. One of his men set a charge. A muffled thump blew at the hinges, and they surged inside. The interior of the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, lit by swaying halogen bulbs that cast long, twitching shadows. The moment they entered, the air exploded. Moretti's men were waiting. Gunfire erupted from the catwalks above, sparks showering down as bullets struck the metal crates. "Cover fire!" Marco shouted, dragging Dante behind a forklift as bullets chewed up the concrete where he had been standing. "Push forward!" Dante roared, leaning out to fire 3 precise shots. A man on the catwalk screamed and fell, crashing into a stack of pallets. The firefight was chaotic and brutal. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of shouting and gunfire that filled the cavernous space. Dante didn't stop. He moved from cover to cover, relentless, a force of nature driving toward the metal staircase that led to the foreman's office. He saw a man pop up from behind a crate, leveling a shotgun. Dante didn't flinch. He fired twice, center mass, dropping the threat before the man could pull the trigger. "Secure the ground floor," Dante yelled to Marco. "I am going up." "Boss, wait!" Marco shouted, but Dante was already moving. He sprinted up the metal stairs, bullets pinging off the railing near his hand. He kicked the door to the office open. The room was small and smelled of stale cigarettes. In the corner, huddled under a desk, was Lana. She was crying, her hands over her ears. Standing over her, using the desk as a shield, was Rick. Rick looked manic. His eyes were wild, sweat pouring down his face. He held a snub-nosed revolver, and his hand was shaking violently. He pointed it at the door, then jerked it toward Lana. "Stay back!" Rick screamed. "I will do it! I swear to God! Dante, I will do it!" Dante froze. He lowered his rifle slowly, letting it hang by its strap. He held up his hands, palms open. "It is over, Rick," Dante said. His voice was calm, cutting through the panic in the room. "The Moretti crew is dead or dying downstairs. There is no payout. There is no escape." "You ruined everything," Rick spat, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. "She was mine. They were mine. You think you can just take them because you have money? Because you have guns?" "I didn't take them," Dante said, taking a slow step forward. "You threw them away." "Don't come closer," Rick shrieked. Aiming the gun at Lana's huddled form, Lana sobbed, "Daddy, please." The sound of her voice broke something in Dante. He saw the terror in her eyes, the same terror he had felt as a boy, hiding in a shed, praying for a savior who never came until Alina. "Look at me, Rick," Dante commanded, his voice dropping an octave. "Look at me. You want to kill someone? Kill me. I am the one who humiliated you. I am the one who hunted you. She's just a child. I want you to suffer," Rick sneered. "I want you to watch." Rick's finger tightened on the trigger. Dante didn't think. He reacted. He lunged. It was a desperate, suicidal move. He covered the 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. Rick panicked and fired. The bullet tore through Dante's shoulder, spinning him around, but his momentum carried him forward. He crashed into Rick, tackling him into the wall. The revolver skittered across the floor. They fell into a heap of thrashing limbs. Rick was fueled by desperation and drugs. He fought dirty, clawing at Dante's eyes, kneeing him in the ribs. Dante grunted, ignoring the burning fire in his shoulder. He grabbed Rick by the throat, slamming his head against the floor. Rick scrambled, reaching for a letter opener on the desk. He slashed out, slicing Dante's forearm. Dante roared. He caught Rick's wrist, twisting it until the bone snapped with a sickening crack. Rick screamed. Dante punched him once, twice, a third time. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was an execution. Dante channeled every ounce of rage, every terrified tear Alina had shed, every nightmare Lana had endured, into his fists. Rick went limp. Dante stopped. He was breathing hard, blood dripping from his nose and his shoulder. He stood up, swaying slightly, looking down at the man who had haunted Alina's life. Rick was unconscious, broken, defeated. Dante turned. Lana was staring at him from under the desk, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Dante fell to his knees, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He tried to wipe the blood off his face with his sleeve, but it was everywhere. "Lana," he whispered, "it is okay. The bad man is sleeping. He won't wake up." Lana didn't move. She stared at the blood on his shirt. "I'm sorry," Dante choked out. "I'm so sorry I look scared, but it is me. It is Dante." He reached out a trembling hand. Lana hesitated. Then, with a sob, she launched herself at him. She buried her face in his neck, wrapping her tiny arms around his blood-soaked tactical vest. "I want my mommy," she cried. "I know," Dante whispered, closing his eyes and holding her tight, shielding her from the sight of her father on the floor. "I'm taking you to her right now." Outside, the rain had turned to a drizzle. The blue and red lights of police cruisers were flashing in the distance. Dante's payroll officers arriving to clean up the mess and control the narrative. Alina stood by the lead SUV, her arms wrapped around herself, staring into the dark maw of the warehouse entrance. Marco stood beside her, bandaging a graze on his arm, refusing to let her go inside. "He's been in there too long," Alina whispered. "Why isn't he out?" "He will be," Marco said, though he sounded unsure. Then, movement? A figure emerged from the smoke and shadows. Dante walked out. He was limping slightly. His shirt was torn and soaked red on the left side. His face was battered, bruised, and streaked with grime, but in his arms, carried high and tight against his chest, was a small bundle wrapped in his tactical jacket. Alina gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She broke into a run. "Lana!" Dante stopped. He looked exhausted, as if keeping himself upright was an act of sheer will. He lowered the jacket slightly. Lana lifted her head. She saw Alina. "Mommy!" Dante knelt on the wet asphalt as Alina crashed into them. She grabbed her daughter, pulling her from Dante's arms, covering her face with kisses, sobbing uncontrollably. "Oh my God! Oh my God! I have you! I have you!" Lana clung to her mother, crying softly. Alina held her daughter for a long minute, checking her for injuries, smoothing her hair. Then she looked up. Dante was still kneeling. He was watching them with a look of profound, weary relief. He looked like a man who had nothing left to give. Alina handed Lana to Marco, who gently took the girl to the warm car. Alina turned back to Dante. She saw the blood pouring from his shoulder. She saw the way his hands were shaking. "You brought her back," she whispered, dropping to her knees in the rain before him. "I promised," Dante rasped. His voice was weak. Alina didn't care about the blood. She didn't care about the violence that clung to him like a second skin. She threw her arms around his neck and hugged him with everything she had. She pressed her face into his ruined shirt, the metallic smell of blood filling her nose, but underneath it, he smelled like rain and survival. She felt him flinch at the contact, then slowly, his arms came up to wrap around her waist, holding her tight. "Thank you," she sobbed against his neck. "Thank you." Dante buried his face in her hair. "I have got you," he murmured, his body finally sagging as the adrenaline left him. "I have got you, both." The safe house was quiet. It was a small, unassuming cottage on the edge of the city, far from the penthouse and the estate. A doctor on Dante's payroll had come and gone, stitching the bullet wound in Dante's shoulder and setting the fractured ribs. Lana had been examined. She was physically unharmed, just exhausted and scared. It was 3 a.m. Lana was asleep in the big bed in the master bedroom. Alina lay beside her, one hand resting protectively on her daughter's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Alina couldn't sleep. She slowly extricated herself and walked out to the living room. Dante was sitting in a chair facing the front door. He was shirtless, his torso wrapped in white bandages that stood out starkly against his tan skin. His arm was in a sling. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching the door, his eyes alert, a fresh gun sitting on the side table next to him. Alina walked over to him. "Dante," she whispered, "you need to sleep. The doctor said you lost a lot of blood." He looked at her. His eyes were soft, but the vigilance didn't leave them. "I can't." "Why?" "Because every time I close my eyes, I see him holding that gun to her head," Dante said quietly. "I need to make sure no one comes through that door." Alina reached out and took his hand, the one that wasn't injured. She pulled him gently. "No one is coming," she said. "Rick is gone. The Morettis are gone. You won." "I almost lost," he countered, his voice thick with self-loathing. "But you didn't," she said firmly. She sat on the arm of his chair and stroked his hair. "You saved us. You are the only reason my daughter is breathing right now." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Come to bed, Dante. You don't have to watch anymore. We are safe." He looked at the door one last time, then up at her. The tension slowly leaked out of his shoulders. He nodded. He stood up, wincing slightly, and let her lead him to the bedroom. He didn't get under the covers. He lay down on top of the quilt, positioning himself on the edge of the bed, his body a barrier between the door and the mother and child. Alina lay down and curled into his side, resting her head on his uninjured shoulder. She felt his arm come around her, pulling her close. Dante didn't sleep immediately. He lay there in the dark, listening to the breathing of the 2 people he loved more than life itself. He stared at the ceiling, the pain in his shoulder a grounding reminder that he was alive, and vowed silently that this was the last time. He would end the war. He would leave life. Finally, as the first gray lights of dawn touched the window, the Mafia boss closed his eyes and let himself rest. The silence that followed the violence was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and loud with the noise of the outside world trying to break in. For 3 weeks, the city was in a frenzy. The shootout at the warehouse had been too big to sweep under the rug. The news channels ran 24-hour coverage of the gangland war at the docks. Helicopters buzzed over the skyline like angry hornets. The district attorney, sensing a career-making opportunity, launched a task force. Dante's empire was under siege. Inside the penthouse, the mood was grim. The curtains were drawn tight against the telephoto lenses of the paparazzi stationed down the street. The air smelled of antiseptic and stress. Dante's arm was still in a sling, his shoulder healing slowly, but the mental toll was far more visible than the physical one. He spent his days on encrypted calls, his voice low and clipped, managing the fallout, paying off judges, and silencing witnesses. Alina watched him from the doorway of the study. He looked 10 years older than he had the night they met in the alley. The darkness under his eyes was bruised and deep. She walked in, carrying a tray of tea neither of them would likely drink. "The lawyer says the subpoena is invalid," Dante said to the room at large, hanging up the phone. He rubbed his face with his good hand. "But they are freezing the accounts associated with the shipping front. It is a mess." "Dante," Alina said softly. He looked up. His eyes softened instantly when they landed on her, but the guilt was still there, sharp and agonizing. "How is she?" "She's with the therapist," Alina said, setting the tray down on the desk. "She drew a picture today, a house, a dog, and a man with a black shield." Dante flinched. "A shield?" "She says it is you," Alina said. She walked around the desk and rested her hip against the edge, forcing him to look at her. "She is healing. Dante, children are resilient, doctor. Evan says the nightmares are getting shorter." "They shouldn't be happening at all," Dante muttered, looking away. "I brought this on her. The police are outside. The reporters are outside. This isn't a life. Alina, it is a cage. It is our life," she corrected him. "It doesn't have to be yours," he said, his voice rough. "I have prepared a package. New identities, a house in Oregon, enough money to live for 3 lifetimes. You can take Lana. You can go tonight. You won't be connected to me when the indictment comes down." Alina reached out and took his chin in her hand, turning his face back to hers. "You still don't get it, do you? I didn't stay with you because of the money. I didn't stay with you because I needed saving. I stayed because I love you." Dante closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I am sinking. Alina." "I don't want to drag you down with me." "Then stop swimming against the current," she whispered. "Let the ship go down. Just make sure you are not on it when it sinks." Dante opened his eyes. He stared at her, the gears in his mind turning. For the first time in weeks, the despair cracked, revealing a sliver of the brilliant, tactical mind beneath. "Let it sink," he repeated slowly. 2 nights later, Dante summoned Silvio to the penthouse for dinner. It was a somber affair. The table was set with the finest silver, but the food, steaks seared to perfection, went mostly untouched. Lana was asleep in the back room, guarded by Marco. Silvio, a man who had served Dante's father before him, looked nervous. He swirled his wine, watching Dante carefully. "The Moretti territories are open," Silvio said, trying to talk business. "If we move now, we can consolidate the docks. We can own the entire eastern seaboard." Dante cut a piece of steak, his movements deliberate. "No." Silvio blinked. "Boss, if we don't take it, the Russians will. Or the Triads. We cannot show weakness." "I am not showing weakness," Dante said. He put his fork down. "I am showing an exit strategy." The room went dead silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. "I am done. Silvio," Dante said calmly. "I want out." Silvio let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You cannot just get out. Dante, this isn't a country club. You are the capo. You leave in a box or you leave in handcuffs. Those are the rules." "Rules change," Dante said. "I have almost lost the 2 things that actually matter to me. I realized something in that warehouse. Silvio, I don't want the crown anymore. It is too heavy, and it is covered in blood. They will hunt you," Silvio warned, his face grave. the rivals, the police. If you step down, you are a target. Not if I am already dead, Dante said. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather binder. He slid it across the white tablecloth. Silvio opened it. His eyes widened as he scanned the documents: bank transfers, offshore accounts, deeds to properties, and a transfer of power agreement, signed and notarized, naming Silvio as the head of the family. "This is everything," Silvio whispered. "The codes, the contacts, the blackmail files on the senator." "It is yours," Dante said. "The empire, the money, the power, all of it." Silvio looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. "And the price?" "You handle the transition," Dante said. "There is an attack coming. I know the Russians are planning to hit the Obsidian Club tomorrow night to test our defenses after the warehouse raid. We are going to let them, Silvio asked, horrified. "We evacuated the staff. We clear the building. When they hit it, we let it burn. And in the chaos, Dante DeLuca dies." Dante leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "I vanish. Alina vanishes. We become ghosts. You step out of the ashes as the new boss who avenged me. You get the power. I get my life. Do we have a deal?" Silvio stared at the man he had watched grow from a frightened boy into a king. He looked at the resolve in Dante's face. He looked at the binder worth billions of dollars. Slowly. Silvio closed the binder and placed his hand on top of it. "It will be a closed casket," Silvio said quietly. "A tragedy." Dante nodded. "A tragedy." The destruction of the Obsidian Club was the lead story on the 11 o'clock news the next night. It was spectacular. A car bomb, followed by a fire that gutted the historic building. The news anchors spoke in grave tones about the suspected death of the elusive crime lord, Dante DeLuca, who was believed to be in his private office at the time of the blast. From the deck of a trawler boat 3 miles off the coast, a man in a wool watch cap watched the distant orange glow against the skyline. He did not look back. He walked into the cabin where a woman and a little girl were sleeping on a bunk, wrapped in thick blankets. The boat rocked gently on the dark waves. The man sat down on the floor beside the bunk, resting his head against the mattress. He took a deep breath of the salty air. It smelled clean. It smelled like freedom. 6 months later, the town of Harper's Cove was a speck on the map of the Pacific Northwest. It was a place of gray skies, rocky beaches, and pine trees that grew right down to the water's edge. The locals were quiet, hard-working people who didn't ask questions. They knew the family in the blue cottage at the end of the lane as the Millers. David was a carpenter who did excellent work repairing fishing boats. Elena worked part-time at the bakery. Their daughter, Lana, was the brightest kid in the first-grade class. It was a simple life. It was a quiet life. On a Tuesday evening, the clouds broke, revealing a stunning sunset that painted the ocean in shades of violet and gold. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of cedar and brine. Dante. David. Now. Though Alina still whispered his real name in the dark, walked along the waterline. He wore a thick flannel shirt and work boots, his hands calloused from sanding wood instead of breaking bones. Alina walked beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. She looked healthier. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by a glow that had been missing for years. Ahead of them, Lana was chasing a golden retriever they had adopted from the local shelter. Her laughter rang out, clear and unburdened, mixing with the sound of the crashing waves. "She is happy," Dante said, watching Lana throw a stick into the surf. "We are all happy," Alina said, squeezing his arm. Dante stopped walking. He turned to face the ocean, the wind ruffling his hair. The scar on his eyebrow was still there, a white line against his tan skin, but the tension that used to define his posture was gone. "I miss the coffee," he admitted with a small smile. "The coffee in this town is terrible." Alina laughed. "I will buy you a new machine for your birthday. We can import beans." "Alina," he said, his tone shifting. It became serious, though not grave. She stopped laughing, sensing the change. She turned to face him. "What is it? Is everything okay?" "I have been thinking about the past," he said. He reached into his pocket. "I have been thinking about the bullets, the violence, the metal that almost took everything from us." He pulled his hand out, In his palm sat a small velvet box. Alina's breath hitched. "I kept the casings," Dante said softly. "From the warehouse. From the night I got her back. I didn't want to forget how close we came to the edge." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. It was not a diamond. It was a band of dark, polished gunmetal, heated and hammered and folded 1,000 times until it was something new. In the center, set deep into the dark metal, was a small, flawless white sapphire. "I melted them down," Dante said, his voice trembling slightly. "I took the things that were meant to kill us, and I turned them into a circle. A promise. No beginning, no end." He dropped to one knee in the wet sand. Alina covered her mouth with her hands, tears springing to her eyes instantly. "Alina," Dante said, looking up at her with eyes that were open and clear, "I cannot give you an empire anymore. I cannot give you a penthouse in the sky. All I have is this town, these 2 hands, and a heart that beats only for you." "Will you marry me?" Alina laughed, a sound that was half sob. She dropped to her knees in the sand beside him, ignoring the cold water soaking her jeans. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." 1,000 times. Dante slid the ring onto her finger. It was warm from his pocket. It fit perfectly. He kissed her, and the taste of the salt spray on their lips was sweeter than any vintage wine. "Mommy! Daddy!" They broke apart as a wet, sandy whirlwind slammed into them. Lana threw her arms around both their necks, the dog barking happily around them. "Are you hugging?" Lana asked, giggling. "You are getting all wet." "We're getting married, baby," Alina said, wiping her eyes. Lana's eyes went wide. "Can I be the flower girl?" "You can be whatever you want," Dante said, pulling her into his lap and kissing the top of her head. "You are the princess." The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep, bruising purple. The 3 of them walked back up the path to the cottage, the lights of their home glowing warm and welcoming in the twilight. Later that night, after Lana had been tucked in and the dog was sleeping by the fire, Dante stepped out onto the front porch. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark ocean. The rhythm of the waves was a lullaby that settled his soul. He thought about the boy in the shed. He thought about the man in the warehouse. He thought about the gravestone in New York that bore the name Dante DeLuca, a monument to a man who no longer existed. The screen door creaked open. Alina stepped out. She was wearing one of his oversized sweaters, her hands resting on her stomach. Dante turned. He watched her for a moment, his gaze dropping to her hands. He knew. He had known for a week, seeing the way she moved, the way she tired easily in the afternoons. He walked over to her. He didn't say a word. He simply placed his large, warm hand over hers, covering the slight swell of her belly. Alina looked up at him, smiling. "I was going to tell you tonight." "I know," he whispered. "I feel it." He moved his hand, sliding it under the sweater to rest against the warmth of her skin. He felt the life there, a tiny, fragile spark that was part him, part her, and completely innocent. "A boy?" he asked softly. "Maybe," she said, "or another girl." Dante rested his forehead against hers. The wind chimed the wooden decorations hanging from the eaves. "I was so afraid of my blood," Dante confessed into the space between them. "I was afraid it was poisoned, that I would pass the violence down like a sickness." "Your blood is not poisonous," Alina said fiercely. "It is just blood. It is what you do with it that matters." Dante nodded slowly. He kissed her forehead, then knelt down, pressing a kiss to her stomach through the fabric of the sweater. He stayed there for a long moment, on his knees on the porch of a simple house at the edge of the world. "This time," he said softly, making a vow to the stars and the ocean and the woman he loved, "I will be the father I never had. I will build tree houses instead of empires. I will teach them to fish instead of fight." He stood up and pulled Alina into his arms, holding her as if she were the only anchor in a stormy sea. "And no one," he whispered into her hair, "is ever taking you from me again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey from the rainy alleyways of the city to the peaceful shores of the coast. And I hope you enjoyed every twist and turn of Dante and Alina's romance. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below with your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of passion, danger, and redemption, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section in English. Did Dante make the right choice? I can't wait to read your opinions. Until next time, keep reading.